You may have heard about this woman who went up the side of a mountain that she really probably should have avoided. She and her husband were skiing, and so they went up on the ski lift, and it was only when she got up to the top of the ski lift that she realized suddenly, you know, these kind of things happen, she realized that she needed to visit. This is kind of the delicate part of the sermon. She needed to visit the necessary room. It was necessary for her to visit this room. And of course, there's no such room up there, and she didn't know exactly what she was going to do. It seemed rather important that she do it as quickly as she could. Her husband had a brilliant idea. You know, we husbands are good for brilliant ideas every now and again. And so he told her that she ought to go. There were some woods over there, some trees. So she ought to go over into the trees and just, you know, that was sort of use that as kind of the necessary room. So she decided that that's what she was going to do. She didn't really have too much choice, so she went over and she was wearing, now picture this, I don't know what color it was, but she had this one-piece ski outfit on. And so she unzipped it and sort of rolled it down, you know, her body. Are you picturing it with me? And so there she, you know, this could have been a brilliant idea. She decided later that this plan might have worked if she had just taken her skis off first, because it was really kind of imperceptible to her at first, but then, you know, sort of just gathering a little momentum, a little speed, she began to ski backwards down the mountain. So there she was, and after a while she was going at really quite a clip. So there she was, streaking literally down the mountain until she hit a tree. This is the bad part. She hit a tree and she broke her leg. They airlifted her down to the medical center. She's down there. There's a man there who broke his arm. You know, these things happen. So he broke his arm, and so they're talking, and she asked him how he broke his arm. And he said, well, you know, the craziest thing happened. I was on this ski lift. I was minding my own business when I see this crazy woman skiing backwards, naked, down the mountain. And here's my favorite part. He said, I leaned over to get a better look. And that's when I fell out of the ski lift and I broke my arm. And then, of course, he asked her, now, how did you break your leg? And, you know, so that's the end of the story. But, you know, we have these days, don't we? We have these moments in our lives. We have these, I don't know, for some of us, we have these years, these decades. Some of us, it seems like, have these lifetimes when things happen. Now, of course, you know, we have those high moments in our lives, too. I remember asking this one man, in sort of a former life of mine, I would ask him every day, you know, how's he doing, how you doing? And he would always say, you know, most people just sort of a formality. They'll say, I'm good, I'm fine. But he would always say, excellent. I'm excellent. If I were any better, I'd be two people. You know, which if you knew him was kind of scary. But, you know, sometimes we're just feeling that way. Sometimes we're on top of the world, and sometimes it's almost like we're carrying the weight of the world. Sometimes we're on top of the mountain, and sometimes we've kind of fallen off the mountain. We've fallen, and it just seems like we can't get up. There's no way that we can get up. I heard about this golf course that was built in India. It was built during colonial days by the British in Calcutta, and it had this rather unique obstacle that when they were building it, they just hadn't really planned on. They built this golf course, and when they were finished, they knew there were monkeys around, you know, when they were building it, but when it was finished, all of a sudden they realized there are monkeys around. So the monkeys would drop down out of the trees, they'd grab the golf balls, they'd throw them here and there, they'd play with them, and so on. So, you know, but these are the British, you know, they're going to do something about this. So, you know, so they try to control the monkeys. At first, they build these fences, you know, around the fairways, around the greens, but, you know, a fence is no match for a determined monkey. So they got in right away. And then they tried to lure them away. Maybe we can lure them away with food and with other things. But, you know, a determined monkey will not be lured away. It was much more fun, much more interesting for the monkey to kind of be there and to watch these human beings go wild when their little golf balls were being played with. And then they tried to trap the monkeys. Now, they didn't kill the monkeys, but they trapped them and tried to take them away. But for every monkey that was trapped and taken away, it seemed like another monkey or maybe another 6 monkeys would show up and be there at the golf course. So finally they came up with this rather novel new ground rule for the golf course. And the ground rule was play the ball where the monkey drops it. Play the ball where the monkey was going to be part of the game. So you might as well just kind of get used to that and play the ball where the monkey drops it. Sometimes the monkey helps you and sometimes it hurts you. Sometimes you hit the best shot of your life and the monkey grabs the ball and takes it into the rough. Sometimes you hit the worst shot of your life into the rough and the monkey grabs the ball and puts it on the green for you. And it seems to me that life is like that. In all the illustrations I've used, I don't know if there's a more appropriate illustration for life than these monkeys on the golf course play the ball where the monkey drops. I mean, we talk about, that's the way the ball bounces sometimes. There's a sense in our lives that we have to live our lives the way it comes. Sometimes we're on top of the world, and sometimes we're carrying the weight of the world. Sometimes we're on top of the mountain, and sometimes it seems like we've just fallen off the mountain. We've fallen down, and we can't get up. I remember this one basketball player, this professional basketball player. His name was Reggie Lewis. Do you remember Reggie Lewis? He played for the Celtics. He was getting to be really at the peak of his game. His other players for the Celtics were kind of near the end of their time. Larry Bird and Havlicek and Robert Parrish and some of those were just about ready to retire, had retired. He was going to take their place. He was going to be one of those that was going to take their place. They were going to have this long dynasty. And here he was, 27 years old, at the peak of his abilities, in the best shape of his life, you would think. And yet one day on the basketball court in a practice session, when he was going all out, but it was a practice session, at the age of 27, he dropped over dead. And of course, at first, they wondered, now, is it drugs or something? Lynn Bias and others around that time had also had some problems, but it wasn't. It was just his heart. These kind of things happen. There's apparently a medical term for this. Someone in the prime of their life who just something happens to the heart and it wasn't there, sort of a widowmaker thing, and they just drop over. So here he was gone. And a friend of his was approached by a reporter. They were sort of asking what people were thinking about this, what they were doing. And his thoughts were this. He said something like this teammate of Reggie Lewis. He said, my thoughts are just questions. Questions and questions and no answers. It's as if this monkey had gotten a hold of a golf ball, in this case a basketball, and you just have to play the ball where it lands, where the monkey drops it. Annie Dillard is a name you may recognize. She's a writer. I don't know that she's written anything too recently, but at one point she was really on top of the game of writing. She's from Pittsburgh originally, from Shadyside. And she was talking to one person at one point, and they were talking about life. And this person said something like this. She said, it just seems like we've been set down here sometimes, and can't nobody tell us why. And I wonder if, as I was thinking about this passage in Joseph, this story of Joseph, my favorite story, these long few chapters on Joseph, and we're spending some time with it here in June, but, here's Joseph, just sort of set down here in Egypt. Last week, what we saw was Joseph was on top of the world. He was his father's favorite son. He had this coat. Sometimes we say coat of many colors. Sometimes scholars suggest that it's not coat of many colors. It's this robe with long sleeves that showed a richness, a royalty. He was being set up almost as royalty compared to his brothers. And he had this dream, that his brothers and his parents were bowing down to him, that the whole world was bowing down to him. And now here he is, and I think rather than read this, I'm going to let you read this later just to conserve a little bit of time, but maybe many of you know the story anyway. Here he is. His brothers initially were going to kill him, but then they decided maybe we shouldn't do that, and so they sell him. I mean, it's almost as bad. They sell him as a slave. He ends up in Egypt. He ends up in this official's home, Potiphar. And he kind of rises to the top of that a little bit, but then Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. And he won't do it. He won't give in to this. It's just not in his nature to do this. And then after she realizes that he won't do that, she accuses him. And here is Joseph now at the end of our story for today in prison. I mean, there's a real sense that he has fallen and he can't get up. The monkey has dropped the ball in prison. And so here he is. When I think of this, and I think of all the people I talk with, all that I observe in the world, it just seems to me, as I think about sort of this fallenness and this sense of, what's the future going to be? We ask, what's the future going to be here for Joseph? When I think about this, and it just seems to me, and people have expressed this to me recently over the past year or more, just seems to be an uneasiness, an uneasiness in the world, an uncertainty. I don't know, do you feel this? I can't quite put my finger on exactly what it is, but it seems to be there. Is it, there's so many things maybe. Is it the economy still for many of us? Is it all these social issues that seem to be tearing us apart, even as a denomination, as the Methodist Church and in our world? Just some of these social issues that are so divisive. Is it the nasty political climate that just continues? I thought maybe it'd get better at some stage, but it seems like it's just getting worse. Is it terrorism? Is it violence that just approaches from every corner? Is it racism? Is it the fight over immigration and other things like that? Is it just a sense of is it drugs? The opioid crisis that's right here. It's right here at our doorstep, I think. Is it just this sense of this culture of almost anger and accusation and grievance that we just play out in every sort of social media? I don't know what it is, but it just seems as though there are so many things sort of tearing at the fabric of our nation. And then I think of all the personal struggles that so many people I know, so many people in the church and other places you hear about. Just some of the challenges that some people face are so daunting. There's really a sense that we've fallen and we just can't get up. Will we ever be able to get up? I find hope. Now, I have to tell you this on the other side. I find hope in this story of Joseph. I find hope in this chapter, and I'd encourage you to it's right here in the bulletin, to read. I kind of explained what it is, but I find hope because when you read this, you'll see that there's this recurring theme, this recurring phrase that we find here, that the Lord was with Joseph. He's sold into slavery. The Lord was with Joseph during that whole time. He's taken away to Egypt. The Lord was with him. He's sold into slavery, and he's under the dominance of this master, this official who's part of Pharaoh's court. But the Lord was with him. He's seduced and taken advantage of and accused. The Lord was with him. He's thrown into prison, and we read finally these words: the chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Someone shared a quote with me the other day, sort of reminded me of a quote, and I had seen it before, and yet I'd forgotten about it, and they reminded me. It's from Louis L'Amour. Do you remember Louis L'Amour? I've never read a word of Louis L'Amour. He wrote Westerns. I've never read a Western in my life. Not that there's anything wrong with it. But he said this: there will come a time when you believe everything is finished. That will be the beginning. Gandhi once said this: when I despair, I remember that all through history, the ways of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem to be invincible. But in the end, they always fail. And then he wrote, think of it, always. And that's because I think the Lord is with us. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord is with you. The Lord is with me. The Lord is there. The Lord is present. The Lord is at work. The Lord always finds a way. The Lord always makes a way. One of my favorite little scenes in the New Testament, in the Gospel, is of the disciples. They're out in a boat at night, in the middle of the night, I guess. I don't know what they're doing out there, I forget, but they're out there. It's dark. They're in the Sea of Galilee. And apparently storms can come up almost sort of in an instant in the Sea of Galilee. So there they are. The storm is all around them. It's dark. They can't see anything. The wind and the waves are just about to crack up their little fishing vessel. And they're afraid. They're so afraid. They know that this is probably the end. And then they see Jesus. Jesus comes to them. Jesus walks right out to them on the water. And then it says, and this is one of my favorite verses, it says, then Jesus got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped. Now, I don't know whether the wind actually stopped, physically stopped, or whether it just sort of stopped in their minds, in their imaginations, because now they weren't facing this storm on their own, but Jesus was in the storm with them. The Lord was with them. The Lord is with you. One of my favorite little stories is about this family of three that went to the beach one day on vacation, and the mother and father and a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and they tell her not to wander off. Of course, she wants to play by herself a little bit, but they tell her not to wander off, but she does. She thinks she's more grown up than she really is, so she gets a little too close to the water, and all of a sudden a great big wave comes in and it knocks her down. So she tries to get up, but there's another wave that comes in, and it knocks her down, and she sort of starts to panic and yell for help, and she tries to get up, but the sand is shifting out from under her, and she just really is kind of in panic mode at this point. All she can see are the waves and the sand that's there, when all of a sudden, down into her world reaches her father's arms, and he grabs her up into his arms. And in this, I see an image of God, and he just holds her close, and he whispers into her ear, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You don't have anything to be afraid of. I was watching you the whole time."